Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for our webinar on buying French property and moving to France. My name's Karen Tate. I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm a freelance, I'm a freelance journalist. I've been editing French property news for the last 20 odd years, and I also contribute to titles such as the Sunday Times. I'm joined by our panel of experts who are all eagerly waiting to answer your questions. If you have any questions during the webinar, you should be able to see a box to the right of your screen. So firstly, I'll pass over to our panelists to introduce themselves. We're just missing one of our panelists, Carol, who's standing in for Joanna Leggett tonight. Hopefully she'll be able to join us soon. If I pass over to the other panelists. Hello, Carol. We can hear you, but we can't see you. So I think you just need to turn on your camera. We are. So if you try and get your camera on, I shall pass over to the other panelists to introduce themselves. So Tracy, would you like to go first?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Tracy Leonetti. I'm a relocation expert based in the south of France for the past 30 years. So myself and my team of experts, what do? Well, we help people like yourself with the relocation to France. So obviously, our area of expertise is visas and immigration, residency cards, healthcare affiliation, not the insurance part. That's obviously more for Paulette, but the actual affiliation of healthcare, affiliation with creating the businesses, driving license exchanges, car registrations, really all the paperwork footsteps that you will encounter when moving, living or creating a business in France. So here this evening to help respond to any of the questions you have on visas, and of course after the event reach out to us if you need any support.
Lovely, thanks Tracy. And Sharon?
Hi everybody, I'm Sharon Rebel. I'm a French mortgage broker and I look after the international team at CAFP. I have 22 years experience in dealing with non-resident and international clients, and I look forward to be able to answer your questions this evening with regards to French property finance.
Thanks Sharon. And Paulette?
Hi everybody, I'm Paulette. I'm the co-founder and director of Agence AXA International. We're a dedicated English-speaking AXA agency serving the whole of France. Many of my team, like me, have been through the relocation process, so we know what you're facing. And we offer different insurance solutions tailor-made to your individual needs.
Thanks, Paulette. And Jake?
Hi everyone, my name's Jake. I'm the founder of SJB Global. So we're an international financial advisory company specialising in predominantly helping UK and US expats. So we deal with things like retirement planning, investment and tax planning, and also estate planning. So predominantly what we're trying to do is provide holistic advice with a fee-based model. And we're really just trying to structure people's assets correctly when moving to France, because when dealing with different jurisdictions and cross-border issues, it can get quite complex.
It certainly can. Thanks, Jake. And Jonathan?
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I work for Lumon. Lumon is an international payment specialist. We have real expertise in the foreign property market, essentially the money transfer side of things for that purchase or sale. In my 15 years I've been here, I've helped thousands of clients moving money around the world and in and out of France, and there's not many situations I haven't covered. So as well as a good understanding of the French buying process, I'm also very interested in the FX markets, and I have appeared in the media talking about the markets and forecasts. Now, one of the things we like to do in these webinars is just to find out a little bit about you, the audience. So you should see a poll on your screen now regarding when, just gonna have some water, excuse me, when you might be beginning to look at your property. So thank you very much. Excellent, everyone who is answering there. So I can see quite a lot of people looking at the moment. We have seen a lot of interest in France, with the euro being a little bit weaker this year. So yes, a lot of people looking potentially in the first half of this year. So thank you very much, everyone who has answered that poll. And I'm just going to launch our second poll regarding the financial aspect. When you're buying a property over in France, it's not a same-day thing, of course, and there'll be a period of time from that offer being accepted to your final completion, and in that time the currency markets can be moving quite a bit. So it can be helpful to understand some of the different options that are available to actually buy your currency, and we will run through those this evening. So thank you everyone who's answered that poll, and I'm just going to launch our final one, and that's just regarding where you might be joining us from in the world. The actual buying process is the same wherever you are from in the world, but there can be little nuances, certainly from a currency point of view, and also different matters locally to consider. But yes, looks like a lot of people from the UK, also seeing a lot of Americans looking in Europe, which we have seen in recent years, and yes, quite a few in France and the rest of Europe. So thank you very much everyone who has answered those polls. I'm going to pass back to Karen and have a glass of water. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well done for getting through that with a frog in your throat. So just check again. Carol, can you hear us? Are you there without?
And it's saying that my webcam is on, but for some reason you can't see me, so I'm not really sure why. So I do apologise, but it's saying that my webcam's on.
Okay, well, your voice is better than nothing, so perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself anyway.
So I'm Carol Curtis and I live in Brittany, and I'm an estate agent for LEGGETT IMMOBILIER International. I'm due to very shortly move to the south of France, so open to questions this evening, well, with regards to Brittany, anything to do with obviously buying and selling property, and obviously looking forward to your questions this evening.
Lovely, thanks, Carol. So let's start off with a question for Tracy on visas. Bettina Conrad, she says, when should I apply for a long-term visa? I hope to purchase a property in May 2025. I'm a retiree with significant savings, and she's based in the US, but that question would equally apply to Brits listening in.
Yes, yeah, really good question. And yes, like you say, you know, whether you're a non-European, America or UK or any non-European country, the same rules apply. So, so if you're hoping to move to France in May, it sounds to me like you're looking for a long-term visitor's visa because you're retirees with sufficient funds. So the process really needs to start now. You're already in March. The visa process tends to take about 2 to 3 months. When I say 2 to 3 months, that's really from starting. So your application, getting your appointment in place, going to your appointment and delivering all the evidence that you need to hand over, including your passports, of course, then waiting for the delivery of your visa before moving to France. So that process, depending which visa centre you're working with, can take anything from 2 to 3 months. Because each visa centre has some deadlines and delays, and of course getting an appointment can be a delay of maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and then you wait for a visa, which can be anything from 2 to 4 weeks depending on delays. So my advice would be you should be working on the visa process now, and if you need support with that, reach out to us. We of course can help you with that.
Lovely, thanks Tracy. We've also got a buying question that's on the sort of time scale. It's so this is a question for Carol. It's from Russell Davis, who wants to know what is the average closing time on a property once you have made an offer. So perhaps you give an overview of the buying process from making an offer through to completion.
Okay, yes, with pleasure. Please stop me if it's a little bit long, because obviously the process can be quite long. So obviously from the first offer, which can be made verbally or in writing, it will then be formalised with an intention to buy, which is an electronic signature for buyer and seller, and then that locks in the property for the person for a certain period of time to be decided between the agent and the vendor. And this could be based on if we're waiting on a mortgage offer or a house to be sold, etc., but generally not more than a month. And this then gives the agent or the notaire time to prepare the pre-sale document, which is also known in France as the compromis de vente. This can be drawn up within 2 weeks. and then gives time to obviously ask for the relevant ID and proof of funds from the prospective buyer. The compromise can be written either by the agency, as such Leggett will obviously translate everything for you and will also do the contract electronically if need be. If the document is written up by the notaire, this is usually when the vendor and the buyer are already in France. However, some notaires will provide a DocuSign service, but they will charge for a translation, which Leggett Immobilier will not. A 10-day cooling off period then will begin. During this period, the prospective buyer can retract with no penalties whatsoever and can also not give any reason for their retraction. That is their legal right to retract if they desire to do so. During or at the end of these 10 days, a deposit from 5 to 10% will be paid directly to the notaire. This is why it's so important to already have spoken to a currency provider to have your money in place even before visiting properties, to make sure that you are ready to move forward with a purchase. Within that contract, there may be a clause suspensive, and this could be basically because sale of another property or a mortgage. Once these clauses have been fulfilled and there are no penalties, the deposit will be kept at the notaire. If for whatever reason it's a cash purchase and there are no clauses within the contract, the deposit that has been kept at the notaire will then be returned to the vendor and not to the buyer as compensation. The notaire will then proceed with their due diligence, checking for outstanding loans, court judgments, etc. for both parties, vendor and buyer, and will also request the necessary documents and paperwork with regards to the possibility of preempting a property. This can either be a mairie or the local agricultural community, which will have the right to purchase the property before the buyer. This is extremely rare, and in my whole career with Leggett, I have never had this happen, but this is part of the process and is why in some cases it will take up to 3 months for closure. Once the checks are complete, the notaire will propose a date for completion. Both parties generally will meet at the notaire, but procurations can be signed if physical presence is not possible. A pre-visit before this meeting will be at the house with the agent and both parties, both vendor and buyer, to ensure that the property is in the same condition as when it was visited, and any agreements for furniture and other items are also present. At this point, the contract of sale can be signed and the keys will be handed over to the new owner. Congratulations, you are now the owner of a new property in France.
That's great. Thanks, Carol. So from start to finish, from making an offer to completing, is normally around 3 to 4 months, isn't it?
Yes, it can be quicker if there's no preemption, if a house is in a town, etc., and there's no preemption from SAFER, which is the agricultural community, then yes, it can be up to 3 to 4 months. That's usually the average.
Lovely. Okay, thanks very much, Carol. So let's move on to a tax sort of financial question for Jake. Anya Doll asks, when buying an investment property, for example, a house with several flats that are rented out permanently, what are the consequences of being tax resident in another country versus living in France elsewhere versus living on site, or even having one's own small business on site?
Yes, there's a lot to that question. Lots of different parts. And the thing is, with the different tax rates, it can be quite confusing to fully understand exactly what you're paying. But let's just take a French resident as an example. So on the rental income, that comes under your income tax, and it's taxed at progressive tax rates. So let's just say, for example, you're earning income in France from your employer, you need to add the rental income on top. If you're going to sell the property, you've got capital gains tax. So that's a 19% rate plus social charges. There can be additional surcharges based on the size of the capital gain. So that you need to bear that in mind as well. But there also could be capital gains tax exemptions depending on the number of years you've held the property. So there's quite a sliding scale for this, but the highest, if you held the property for more than 30 years, there'd be no capital gains tax. The next tax, which isn't that common worldwide, there's only a few countries that have it, is wealth tax. And this applies on French properties. And it kicks in at 1.3 million euros. But even though it kicks in at 1.3 million euros, the tax starts from 800,000. So that starts at 0.5%, goes up to 1.5%. There are ways to reduce this because this is a tax you really want to avoid. The way you can reduce that is by utilising mortgages, and you also get a 30% deduction on your primary residence. If you're setting up a small business, so let's just assume it was as a corporation, you've then got corporation tax for the business as opposed to income tax, and that's charged at 25%. There are social charges if you take an income as a business owner, or you can take it via dividends. So it would be assessing both those options to work out which one's more tax favourable. The dividend tax rate with social charges is 30%. So, that probably is going to be the better option. If you're a non-resident, you've still got the same taxes. So rental income does apply, although the rates are between 20 to 30%, depending on the amount of income you've got. Capital gains tax still applies. Social charges, this differs on where you're living. So if you're in the EU, it's different to if you're a non-EU resident. And then wealth tax is exactly the same. But the big thing if you're a non-resident is you've got to think about double taxation agreements, because France has many, I'll just call it DTAs, around the world. If it doesn't have one, there's issues because you could end up getting taxed twice. But if there is one, the idea is to avoid paying tax twice. But you can still end up paying tax twice. And the way you would do that is if you are, because first you'd pay tax in France because it's a country that taxes you based on your worldwide assets. But if there's more tax in the other country, you'd have to pay the difference. So let's just say the rate in France was 30%, but in the country where you're living was 40, you'd pay that 10% difference in the other country. So it differs per country. France is taxing on worldwide, but other countries have a territorial tax system where you just tax based on the amount you remit into the country. But you can't make a decision just based on taxes because there are other things as well. If you're increasing your costs by having a business, there's no difference between tax and cost. If you're increasing your cost by 10%, but you're saving 10% in taxes, you're neutral across the board, but you're probably increasing the amount of work you've got to do. Plus, if you're not in the UK, if you're not in France, then who deals with the problems? Is there someone in French, or can you speak French that can deal with those problems? So it's more about the taxes as well as which is the simplest option between the options that are available.
Thanks, Jake. It's the bigger picture, isn't it? There's a lot of things to think about there, which highlights the importance of seeking professional advice before you go ahead with any of these kind of projects. So let's move on now for a question for Paulette on healthcare. Jason Kilcoyne says, my wife and I are looking to move to France in the next 12 months and will be 59 and 56 years old respectively. If I understand correctly, we will have to arrange private healthcare cover until we reach our retirement ages of 67, when we can then transfer we can then request a transfer from the NHS over to the French Health Service. Is that correct? And if so, are there any recommendations for cover? My wife and I have no pre-existing conditions. So that might just be a yes answer, but maybe not.
It's a yes and no. So yes, you will need health insurance to accompany your visa application. If you're aged, I can't remember what age they're in, the 50s, were they?
56 and 59.
Yeah, so generally when you apply for your visa, you will need a health insurance to accompany that visa application, which needs to last for 12 months. That will mostly cover accident and emergency. Some of the policies will provide a little bit more cover, but generally they're to cover accident and emergency, kind of the larger costs. There aren't a great deal of companies that offer that type of insurance. AXA France don't offer that insurance, so we kind of act as a broker for that, and we've got a sister company called L'Onomie that we put the visa insurance through. So I say there's not a massive amount of companies out there that offer that insurance, but what we do is we've got a partnership with a lot of them, and we can look at your situation. If people have got pre-existing medical conditions, there's a type of policy that's better for those. If you haven't, there's another policy that's better depending on your age. So we'll kind of, go through and do like a really personalised quote for what suits your circumstances. Some of them you can pay annually for the year, but it then can't be cancelled. Some you can pay monthly and you can cancel it. The main thing to remember is once you've been living in France for 3 months, you've actually got the right to apply for a French social security number. So you don't have to wait until you're 67, until you get the S1, the transfer over from the UK. You can actually apply after 3 months to be in the French social security system. That's going to take, this is where Tracy usually laughs if I say, 3 to 6 months. It's probably way nearer the 6 months. Tracy can help you with that application as well, if need be. And once you're in that French system and you've got your social security number, like your national insurance number, you can then change to a mutual top-up, and that's much cheaper than the Visa health insurance, because what that's going to do is top up the refund that you get from the state when you go for medical treatment. Bear in mind for the first few months you're here, when you haven't got your social security number and you've, say, got your policy for accident and emergency, if you do need to visit the doctor, generally that's €30. So, don't worry if you need to go, you've got tonsillitis or something and you need to visit the doctor to get antibiotics. It's not going to cost an absolute fortune. And I say we can do a policy that will cover those things, but for what you would pay, for the off chance that you might in that 6-9 months, visit doctors maybe twice, it's probably not worth the trade-off in cost. But for hospitalisation, for accident and emergency, absolutely, it's worth it.
That's great. Thanks, Paulette. So now a mortgages question for Sharon. How easy is it for a British buyer to get a French mortgage now? I've heard very few lenders are lending to Brits or other non-EU nationals now, so I guess that would apply to Americans or Australians looking for a mortgage too.
Okay, thank you, Karen. How easy is it to get a mortgage as a British resident or non-EU? Is really going to depend on your situation. Mortgages are based on affordability criteria in France, and everybody's situation is different, so it's a difficult question to answer. Because of restrictions since Brexit, it did become very difficult for a while for a UK resident of any nationality to get a mortgage. But that has, it's getting better. There are lenders that will be willing to lend, and how easy it is for you will depend on how much deposits you have, whether you meet. The hardest thing actually about French mortgages is meeting the lending criteria, which is debt to income ratio, and the banks have a very specific way that they look at the affordability of the mortgage, very different to the UK. It's possible for a UK resident to get a mortgage depending on where you purchase and whether you can be considered as a high net worth individual. That will also impact which lenders are able to lend to you. So if you purchase in the south of France and you're a high net worth individual, maybe you will be able to access the whole of the market. Whereas if you buy in, say, Sala, and you're just a normal sort of person and just buying a second home, then you may find that the market is more restricted. But there are still possibilities. You don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of euros to access a mortgage. You can access a mortgage for around 100,000 euros. It's possible. It's also possible for our friends over the Atlantic. I was going to say over the pond, but I don't think we're supposed to say that. But never mind, I've said it now. Anyway, the other side. Getting worse here. And it's also possible for US residents to get a mortgage too, as it is for Australians. It really depends on your individual situation. We're very conscious that the banks have to be able to look at the affordability, as I said, of the mortgage. So it depends on your taxable income and your personal situation. Thanks, Karen. I think I'll stop there.
Thanks, Sharon. So it certainly is possible to get a French mortgage. People should get in touch with a specialist broker like Sharon, who can dig out all the best deals. Okay, so moving on to Jonathan for a currency question now. The currency world seems to have lots of jargon. What are IBAN, BIC and SWIFT codes?
Okay. Oh, tested me here. Feels like a pub quiz potentially, Karen. So yes, the currency world does have, I wouldn't say, yeah, there is quite a lot of jargon because there's going to be a lot of new phrases and perhaps terminology for people, as there may be with buying a property in general. The ones you referred to there, the IBAN, so that's international bank account number. So, you know, if you're in the UK, you're going to be familiar with the sort code and account number. When you're making an international payment, you get something called an IBAN, international bank account number. You then have something called a BIC, or a SWIFT. They're actually the same thing. BIC is bank identifier code. SWIFT, say it's another name for a BIC. That actually stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Now, anyone who's totally new to this, who's maybe furiously scribbling down things, I've got to remember what Jonathan said. You know, you don't have to worry about this too much, because when you're actually buying the property over in France, handily in France, they're quite organised. Sometimes the French, you know, they like things to be organised, done a certain way. They give you something called a RIB. This is actually another abbreviation. Again, you don't need to write it down, but it's a Relève Ident Bancaire. Hope I'm not butchering the French language too much there, but it's a very handy way. They present banking information called a RIB, an RIB, and if you're buying a property in France, you have, as Carol said, the compromis de vente gets signed, and you've got to then make a payment. The notaire or Carol or the agent will actually give you this RIB document, normally as a PDF, or it's emailed to you. So you're going to get this document sent through nicely to you with all of the information on there. So that, you know, it's all designed to be nice and simple. Some more abbreviations for you with this. The compromis de vente, you're going to call that the CDV sometimes. And that's the, what we call in the UK almost the exchange. That's the early part of the agreement, as Carol mentioned. And then it's the acte de vente, the ADV. So maybe some good testers here for anyone for their pub quizzes. But yeah, to keep it nice and simple for people, this all gets communicated to you very, very clearly by everyone over there. You know, you're not going to have to sort of dig around on the internet to find out any of these codes. It's all given to you. And then actually here at Lumon, we've got a very experienced payments team. I mean, I think last year we dealt with about 750 different French notaires. We know many of the notaires that LEGGETT are working with. So we've actually got a lot of their bank details stored on our systems. We double check everything, of course, before any payments are sent out. That's always the client's decision. So yeah, very happy to talk to anyone about what some of these acronyms and things mean. But yeah, when it actually comes to doing a lot of this, all of the experts here can help sort of guide you through what you'll need and make sure it all goes through smoothly.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. And actually, I don't know if this is the same for all statements, but I know on my UK bank account statement, somewhere at the top, it actually has the IBAN and the BIC numbers there listed. So that's quite handy.
Yes.
So let's move on to another buying question for Carol this time. Are you still there with us, Carol?
I'm here. Incognito,
Okay.
but I'm here.
So
I've not managed to sort it out, so apologies.
Okay, no problem. We've got a question here that says, we want to start viewing properties but can't agree on a location. I prefer the sunny south, but my husband is set on Brittany. What are the pros and cons of both? And I suspect that's quite a common problem between couples looking in France.
Yeah, and obviously it's quite a broad question as well, because it's obviously we talked about Brittany, but the south of France is obviously very vast. And obviously my experience at the moment is Brittany, so I could probably talk about it all evening, but I won't. So I'll just get on with it. So yeah, first and foremost, I would definitely recommend that a couple need to agree where they want to be. So that would entail obviously coming together and, you know, spending time with agents, visiting, you know, different properties, different areas, and really deciding that is definitely the most important thing. And obviously with regards to Brittany, why it appeals to so many Brits, etc., is because obviously it's proximity to the UK, the easy access in terms of flights, ferries, etc. The climate, I hate to say it, but is very similar also to the UK. It's never too hot, but it's always pleasant. The beautiful beaches that are also very, very, very close by. We're never far from a beach, whether it's north or south. And obviously very important is the house prices are extremely reasonable, and there's usually lots of land up for grabs with properties as well. Obviously the people, the food, and total value for money. So that's really why, but I would definitely recommend people come out and experience different areas, because they may well change their mind, and maybe take off things off the list that were originally their favourite, and they've changed their mind. But Brittany is an absolutely fabulous place to live and is extremely popular for the reasons that I've just explained. In terms of the south, again, it's a vast area, so we need to know, you know, specifically where people are looking. But where I will be moving to, and obviously working as an agent in the next few weeks, it is called the Var, if people are familiar. So roughly, it's the triangle between Saint-Tropez, Marseille, and Nice. So without obviously having to probably state the obvious, the weather is fabulous. Much longer summers, beaches are absolutely stunning, white sand, aqua coloured water, etc. Very, very cosmopolitan, and it is very much easier to get to Spain, Italy, and other European countries in terms of distance. The scenery, you know, I'm not going to talk about all the places to go and see, because there's way too many, as there are in Brittany as well. But my advice would be, come and spend, if you can, a few weeks just visiting lots of different places, and get in touch with agents. They'll be happy to talk to you about their area, saying, you know, what's good in their area, even show you some properties if you're ready, obviously, and you're ready to move forward with visiting some properties. So France is just beautiful, full stop. So no matter where you go, it's all wonderful.
Thanks, Carol. And perhaps our couple might compromise by choosing a completely different area, somewhere between the north and the south, somewhere along the Atlantic coast, maybe like the Vendée, where there's a lovely sunny climate and you have lots of lovely beach resorts. But
exactly. There's so many
with the culture of Brittany too.
Absolutely. There's so many beautiful places.
I think they may have to do a bit more visiting different places in France to decide.
Yeah,
Okie dokie then. Let's move on to another visa question for Tracy. We always have lots of visa questions. This one is, once I have my visa, what do I need to do? It's valid for 1 year, but I'm not sure what the next steps are. That's an interesting question.
I'd just like to rebound on Carol as well, because I live in the south of France and have for 30 years, so I can vouch it's a great area to live, and the Var's just around the corner from me as well, Carol. So let's meet.
Where are you, Tracy?
I'm in Saint-Césaire-sur-Sienne, which is just literally around the corner from Montereau and in the Var. So
we'll have to meet up then.
Anybody watching this, the south of France, I can vouch for. I've been here 30 years. Place, so lots of things to do. I'm not so sure on the Brittany, I haven't been that far north. So anyway, I digress, and also apologise for my cat, which is coming across the screen, but he's decided it's time for his time to mess around with me. Of course, I'm in my home. It's almost 8 o'clock in France, so so apologies for that. Anyway, so back to the visas. So the question was what to do now that you've got your visa, what are the next steps? Yes. Okay, so if the visa is valid for 1 year, it must be a long stay visa. So the first thing to do when you come to France with your visa, and very important step not to forget, is to validate that visa. You need to go onto the website and validate that. So you create an account, validate and pay your visa fee. And that is applicable to most visas that are valid for a year. You have to validate. So even business visas, non-working visas, the talent passports you validate, but of course there is a different process behind that as well. So it depends if it's a visa that's valid for a year and a residency card, or one that has to reach out to get your residency card. But either way, mostly for long stay visas, it would be validation process first. That will then trigger the immigration system behind the scenes. What does that mean? It means that you get called in by the immigration office, the OFI, for an appointment. And that appointment consists usually of an X-ray, chest X-ray. And if it's a long stay visit, it's retirement visa, I'm not sure which visa you have, but if it's a retirement visa, your visa will get stamped in your passport, you'll get a receipt, and then you will go home, and that visa becomes a resident card for the first year. And it will mean that at month 9, 8 or 9, you start the renewal process, okay? If you have a business visa, so if you have a liberal visa, liberal independent visa, then that would be subject to the same validation process. However, when you go to your convocation with the immigration office, you will have a French written test and a French oral test, and you will have to sign what's called a contract of integration, which basically means you have to go to certain meetings where you're learning about the French culture and the French life, so that you integrate that contract of integration. And of course, the test is to establish what level you have, and therefore they may suggest that you have French lessons. So that would be the process, if you like, once you're in France with your visa for a business visa or for a home visitor's visa. And again, even if you're on a business visa, you should think about your renewal process starting at month 8 or 9. And for the passport talent visa, which is slightly different, come into France, you can go online, but when you go through the validation process, you also have to reach out at that moment to get your residency card, because the talent visa is a bit special. It's a very multi-annual visa, therefore there's another process to go through once you're in France, and you should start that process. All of those should start within the first month of coming to France. So I'm sorry it's a bit long, I don't know exactly which visa you have, but yes, there are actions to take.
Thanks, Tracy. As you say, there are several different kinds of visas, which is good because there's usually one to suit most people. But seeking specialist advice is definitely recommended to make sure you get the right one. Okay, so let's move on to a pensions question for Jake. Mike Batt says, I have a private pension that is 100% taxable in the UK. I have already taken the 25% some years ago. I want to avoid tax twice, and he is moving to France.
Yeah, so the pension wouldn't be taxed in the UK. The only part that would be, there's two taxes you've got to think about here. One is income tax when taking the money from the pension, but then inheritance tax, which is a new thing which was brought in by the budget last year, it would be taxed in the UK. So for the actual tax on the scheme, though, if anyone needs to know, as well as the 25% that he's mentioning there, is you can take 25% in the UK tax-free, but it's not tax-free in France. The rest of the money would be taxed as income tax, but with the double taxation agreement between the UK and France, you wouldn't pay tax in the UK, you pay tax in France. So the only issue there is you have to get something called an NT tax code, which is you have to file a tax code with HMRC. If you're just leaving the UK, it's simpler because you probably will have a tax code already registered there. So what you do is you take a minimum withdrawal via the income part of the pension, so not the 25% lump sum, the other 75%, and you then file an NT tax code with HMRC. That stands for no tax. It means all of the money is paid gross of tax from the UK, and you just pay tax in France. There are circumstances where you can't do that. So if you're drawing a state pension, yes, you can. But if you're taking additional income from rental income or something like that, or you're taking a larger lump sum above £100,000, you're not going to be able to get it. So the other alternative is you will be taxed at source, and the way you're taxed is not very good. So if you took, for example, a £10,000 lump sum, HMRC multiplies that by 12 and assume that you're taking 125 grand in that year, even if you're only taking 10 grand. So they're going to tax you as if you were taking 120 grand, which means you're pretty much taxed at 45%. So you do get that money back. So you claim it back. It can take a few weeks, depends how busy HMRC are, and they are generally busy and they're quite difficult to deal with. But there's more to it just on the tax. So just to give you an example, I had a client recently after the budget. We had loads of inquiries. He wanted to see if he could do anything about his inheritance tax on his pension. So he's been in France for 15 years. And I said, before dealing with the inheritance tax, let's look at what your scheme does once you leave the UK, because a lot of times your withdrawal options are restricted, your death benefits are restricted as well. So for this individual, his paperwork said that he had full access to draw the money however he wanted, and it said that he had something called a dependence pension, which meant on death, the pension stayed within the pension scheme, and it wasn't a taxable event. But when he contacted them and said he was living in France, neither of those options applied. So the only option he had was to take the pension as a lump sum, £450,000, and on death, it was paid out as a lump sum, which means there could be inheritance tax in the UK, plus an additional tax on top of that. So what we did, and this was just based on the change in the budget last year, we actually liquidated all of the funds from the pension, which I would have never have done before the budget last year. And the reason we did that is because in France, they have a special tax rate on the first lump sum withdrawal of 7.5%. Social charges could apply, but he was already retired, which meant that was the only tax he paid. So we've liquidated the funds and we're about to move them into a vehicle in France, an Assurance V, which is a lot more tax efficient. So long-winded answer there, but there's a lot that can be done. It really depends on what you have in the pension. So you've already taken money from the scheme in the UK, which is actually not the best if you were to liquidate the pension in France, but you need to look at what the scheme actually does before looking at the tax rates.
Okay, thanks, Jake. A lot to absorb there. Paulette, an insurance question for you now, vehicle insurance. Beverly Massey says she has an English car with no claims discount. Can the no claims be transferred to the French insurance?
So we get this quite a lot with clients who say are moving from the UK or insuring a car at their second home in France, that in the UK, when you've got your no claims, it's attached to you, and when it's in use, it's in use. What we do in France is we will mirror that no claims, because it's not going to be transferred to France, but we ask for the information about your no claims bonus in the UK and we'll mirror it. It's sometimes hard to do if the policy's live in the UK, that they won't issue you with a no claims bonus certificate because it's in use. So they won't give you that certificate. So what we do is we can accept say like your last renewal notice plus an email from the insurer to say there's been no claims made. You know, if your renewal was last week, that's fine. But say if your renewal was 6-9 months ago, we just want to know that there's been no claims between the renewal and now, and we will just manually calculate what that bonus is in France. So you're not losing your bonus that's in use in the UK, and we're just going to mirror it. Now then, here comes a little bit of a problem in that generally a no claims bonus in the UK will say 5 years or more or 9 years or more. We've seen some that actually give the amount, but I would say 90% of the time it says 9 years or more. It takes 13 years in France to get your full no claims bonus. So we will take 9 years or more as 10 years, because if it says 9 years, it's 9 years or more as 10. If you can find your renewal notice from a few years ago that also says 9 years or more, we'll manually work it out to get up to that 13, which gives you a bonus in France called 050. And when you've got your bonus in France, it says that you're 050 since which date, because it keeps counting after 13 years. When you reach 16 years, you can then have an at-fault claim without losing any bonus once. When you get to 19 years, you get an extra discount. So it keeps going. I think you also get a medal when you get to 19 years as well, no claims. If you do have a claim in France anytime, that's an at-fault claim, you don't lose the whole bonus. So say, for example, you get up to 14 years and you have an accident, you think, oh, goodness me, I've lost 14 years. You don't. You just lose a percentage, depending whether it's at fault or partially at fault. So you'll go back a few years and then it carries on counting and back up to where it was. But as I say, it keeps going. And the more you can get up to that 19 years, the cheaper your policy is going to be. But we'll help. You know, we try and give you examples of what you can get that we can use to manually calculate it.
Thanks, Paulette. So I think that's good news for Beverly. It's certainly a different system, but it sounds like she'll still be able to benefit from her no claims.
Yeah.
So Sharon, a quick mortgage question for you now. Cash or mortgage, which is the better option?
Well, I'm a mortgage broker. I'm going to say a mortgage. It's when you make that decision, it's something that depends on your individual situation, and I think it's very important to realize some differences between maybe other countries and France, especially if you are as a non-resident buyer buying a property here. In the UK, for example, people have the ability to remortgage and release equity from the property as the property gains value, i.e. if you've done renovations and your property's gained in value and you have a low capital outstanding on your existing mortgage, it's possible to put a second mortgage or to remortgage the property and kind of have a higher amount as a mortgage. In France, we don't do that. It's only possible to take a mortgage as a non-resident buyer when you've purchased the property, or if you purchase it cash, you can put the mortgage on the property in the 6 months following the purchase. We call that a post-finance mortgage. In those areas, it's in that time, it's possible to put a mortgage on the property and use your cash for other things. If, for example, you purchased a property 5 years ago and you suddenly had a change in your plan and you wanted to raise equity against the property, as a non-resident buyer, it's not possible. The banks won't be able to do it. If you're a fiscal French resident, you may be able to do what we call a secured loan on the property, but it would be at a much higher rate and in more difficult conditions than a normal mortgage. So the answer really does depend on your individual situation. If you're unsure, if you're planning, it's always better probably to take a mortgage out initially and build in, have a mortgage with no early redemption penalty or with the possibility to overpay, and give yourself the flexibility for the future until maybe you know exactly what your plans are. Yeah.
That sounds good advice. Thanks, Sharon. So I currently see one now for Jonathan. My siblings and I live in the UK and have inherited our parents' home in France. We've decided to sell it. How can we ensure we receive the best exchange rate when we transfer the money back to the UK?
Okay, well, thank you for the question. This is interesting. Normally, we're talking about buying property in France, but we can absolutely help clients selling a property over there. And so this could be useful for any buyers who may one day be looking to sell, or you might be looking to bring money back from France for whatever reason. So how Lumen can help with this is we have local bank accounts in France, which we can use to route the payment back through to your UK account. So just to explain a little bit more about how we work in principle, for anyone who's quite new to all of this, Lumen sort of sits as a middleman, if you're a buyer, or a middlewoman, if you're a buyer over in France, between your UK bank account and then any French accounts you're paying to. So you're paying the money into a UK account of Lumen's. It's called a client account, sometimes termed an escrow account. So we're holding the money on your behalf in pounds. We buy euros in a euro account, and then we pay that out to France. So when you're coming back the other way, it's just the reverse. So we have a local account in France, as I said, we can actually take the money from where it's coming. Now, the really sort of clever bit with this is we can actually take funds direct from the French notaire. And this really does help in a number of ways. Euros arrive usually within 24 hours of being sent to this account, and then you can hold the funds here as euros. And you talked there, Karen, about maybe getting the best rate. Well, what we can do is look at the market in a bit more detail. It might be that the week of your completion or the day of the completion isn't actually the best time to do the transaction. So we can hold the euros here and sort of follow the market. You can trade on parts of the funds, you can trade all of it, you can set targets. There's all sorts of different options, and we can talk through the market and the forecasts with the client. So main benefit, the rate and the service, that's all really helpful. But actually the big benefit here is the client avoids having to put the money into their French bank. Now, I don't want to badmouth the French banks particularly, because actually it's quite similar with the UK and the US and banks all around the world. When you're talking about larger amounts of money, you sometimes got to go into the branch, you've got to sign forms and paperwork potentially, you might have to book an appointment, there can be security checks. So as I say, we can take the money direct from the French notaire into this euro account that you have here essentially, and it just cuts out all that hassle. We've seen clients who sort of sell a property in France, travel all the way back to the UK, pack up the house, get the caravan on, drive all the way back, and then only to find they've got to go back to France just to try and access their money. So yes, as with many of the things to do with buying property in France in general that we cover on these webinars. Really important to speak to a specialist early on so we can talk you through some of these pitfalls. And I just mentioned as well, this process where we take the money direct from the notaire, it's exactly the same if you're in America, if you're in the UK or anywhere else in the world and you're buying in France and you're selling that property in your country, the UK, the US, wherever. We can actually take money from your attorney, from your solicitor in the UK into your dollar account here or your sterling account, whichever one it is, of course, and then you can do that trade into euros. And once again, you know, if you've flown over from the US to purchase or ready to sign your paperwork, but you've not actually sorted out the money transfer side of things, you know, you could have a difficult conversation to Carol, trying to explain how you're going to get the money to the notaire in time to sign the paperwork. And exactly the same for the UK. You know, your money could be in a bank. You might only be able to do £10,000 a day online. And if you're in the, you know, almost the middle of nowhere in France, you know, you're on a mobile phone trying to move hundreds of thousands of pounds around, it's not going to be a straightforward process. So again, just worth having a chat with us and all the other specialists here about some of these ins and outs so you can make sure it all goes nice and smoothly.
Okie dokie, thanks Jonathan. So we've got just under 10 minutes left. Let's see if we can get a question for each panelist in before the end. So Carol, we've got a couple of questions on renovation. Christina Ellis is buying a home to renovate and would like to know about the search, the cost, and whether there's grants. And Christina Vipond in the USA says she's interested in buying distressed property. So perhaps you could just do a very brief sort of advice on buying renovation projects in France.
Okay, I'll try my best. Obviously, my experience at the moment is very much specific to Brittany for the moment. And renovations are easy to find here, so lots of neglected and abandoned properties, and that can be from something that needs complete new roof to windows, doors, insulation, etc., or just a habitable property that just needs modernising. So that will really depend on obviously your budget and really what you're prepared to take on. Costings are based on price per square metre in terms of materials and labour. And once again, an agent could usually, they will always have a list of trusted artisans, architects, etc., that will be able to help you and point you in the right direction and really give you, you know, an ideal, well, a budget really of how much, you know, it will cost you to ultimately renovate the property. In terms of permissions, obviously, which is probably the most important, any changes or renovations that you do external to the property, so will obviously be windows, doors, Velux windows, extensions, will need to have permissions, which again, your agent will be able to point you in the right direction or indeed help you with that, and even do pre-planning even before a compromise signed to make sure that what you envisage doing with the property can be is doable. And that will then, all that paperwork will go to the mairie, sometimes to the Bâtiment de France, which is the equivalent of the British Heritage Society in the UK, to obviously grant that permission. And then in terms of grants, there very much is help in France, which is fantastic, for principal home owners in terms of heating, drainage, windows, doors, and again, your agent will be able to give you all the latest information because it does change quite often in terms of obviously what help you can have, and then even helping with the form filling and obviously getting in touch with the relevant departments to make sure that your case is put forward. So yes, there's lots of help out there, lots of properties to be able to get your hands on. You just have to have the courage, the willpower and the money to do it.
Thanks, Carol. Well done for answering a huge subject so quickly. We could cover renovation for a whole hour, I'm sure. Let's move on to a residency question for Tracy. Samantha Kennell says, if you buy in France and want to spend longer than 90 days, can you if you have a residency visa?
That's a bit of a strange question, because if you've got a residency visa, one would suggest that yes, you can. So I guess it depends what residency visa you have. Just as a reminder for anybody who's listening, obviously if you're British or American, you come into France on the 9180, no visa requirements. If you've just bought a property and want to spend more than 90 days out of 180 and maybe don't want to become a full-time permanent resident, then the 6-month visa would be the option to go for. So maybe that's the residency visa you've got. If it's a 6-month visa and you've got a property in France, that's giving you more flexibility with spending time on your property in France, but it's not a residency visa, it is a tourist visa. That's a 6 month. But of course, if you've got a long-term visa, long stay visa, then yes, absolutely, you would be spending more time in France and more time with your property in France. I'm not quite sure if I've got the question right, but hopefully I've given some little tips to you.
That is helpful. Thanks, Tracy. One for Jake now from Helen Jeff says, I'm retired and have work and state pensions. Where will I pay tax and will I be worse off? And she's in the UK moving to France.
Yeah, so the work pensions I already addressed, but where you pay tax would be based on where you're a tax resident. France taxes are based on a household as opposed to an individual. For state pensions, you're no worse off being in the UK than France. So UK pensions go up by inflation in France as well as the UK. One thing I would add though for workplace pensions is I know there's a lot of Americans on here, is retirement accounts based on the double taxation agreement with the US, they're taxed in America only, which is a lot more favourable. The only issue there is you can't buy US ETFs or US funds as a French resident if you're an American or any nationality, and you also can't buy as an American non-US funds or non-US ETFs due to something called PFIC, which stands for Passive Foreign Investment Company. So if you're an American living in France, you've got a good benefit by paying taxes in America, because if you've got a Roth IRA, for example, then you're going to get the money out tax-free, but you have to use direct shares and direct bonds. So if you don't have the ability to be able to create your own portfolio with stocks and bonds, you'd have to use a company like ourselves to be able to structure that for you. One way around that is you can set it up before leaving. So if you had US ETFs and US funds before you go to France, that's absolutely fine. It's when you make changes that you have issues.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Jake. Paulette, Steve McCraith says, with my Irish passport, what is required to obtain medical health support in France once resident?
Okay, so obviously we don't need the health insurance to accompany a visa application, so that makes it easier for you. Depending on the status of how you arrive, if you're going to be working, classed as active, non-active, depends whether you can apply for the French social security number straight away or after the 3 months. In between time, as I said before, it's going to take, 4-6 months or so to get your social security number. We'd very, very much advise like a standalone health insurance policy to cover that accident and emergency when you first arrive. It's much cheaper than the type of policy you need to accompany a visa application. And just to give you a really quick example of that, we had a client who arrived in France and on a second day in France got run over on a zebra crossing, had massive injuries, broken leg, everything. She was in hospital for weeks. That was picked up by, thank goodness she'd arranged, a standalone health insurance policy, and it picked that up as they go into the doctors, €30. That's neither here nor there really. But if you have an accident and you're hospitalized, say for example you have a broken leg and you're hospitalized for operation and hospitalized for say 4 nights, that's going to cost you between €1,000 and €5,000 depending on the type of hospital in the area of France. So it can be very costly for the sake of a policy that's not actually that expensive.
Thanks, Paulette. Let's try and get in another quick mortgages question for Sharon about the process of applying. Do I have to supply lots of documents and prove my income?
Okay, that's really not a quick question, so I'm going to keep this very short. French mortgages are means tested. Yes, you have to prove your documentation, you have to prove your income, you have to prove everything about your existence. We do not have credit reports here, so they can't just log into Experian or the other credit reporting companies and build a picture of you. It's going to be an underwriter that physically looks through your bank statements, tax returns, pay slips, employment contracts, etc. I'm going to stop there. If you want to find out more, feel free to get in touch.
Thanks, Sharon. And finally, let's have a quick one for Jonathan. Again, if you could keep it as brief as possible for not an easy question. We're buying a home in France, and I'm aware the exchange rate is likely to change between making an offer and actually paying for the property. How can a currency company help me?
So as soon as you're registered with Lumon, you get instant access to this Euro wallet, this Euro account. So over that almost 3-month period from the CDV, Compromis de Vente, to the Acte de Vente, the purchase, you've got this window within which at any moment you can purchase the euros to understand your costs. If you don't have all the money available, then you can use a forward contract where you pay a very small deposit to fix the rate, and then you've locked in the price. So that really is the sort of the nutshell. Now, you know, the exchange rate will change. You know, that's guaranteed. Which way is it going to go? No one knows, but we can bring some certainty to an uncertain situation, and then you know what your costs are, and you're not going to have to make any embarrassing phone calls to Carol.
That's great. Thanks, Jonathan. And obviously, people can get in touch with you to learn more. So we are coming to the end of our webinar today. The next one will be on the 23rd of April. You'll receive details by email about how to register for that. And you'll also receive a recording of this webinar, which is really handy if you missed anything or you just want to listen to any of the answers again. We've covered an awful lot today in an hour. Sorry if we didn't get time to answer your question. All the panelists' details are on the screen. Don't hesitate to get in touch with them if you have any questions. They are here to help.
Absolutely.
So thanks again for joining us. I'll just hand over to the panelists to say their farewells too. So over to you, Carol.
Yes, I hope I was useful, and if anybody's got any extra questions, obviously my email is just on the screen, and obviously love to meet everybody and answer lots of questions.
Thanks. And Tracy?
Yeah, likewise, thanks for all the questions, and sorry we didn't get through them all. Do reach out, it is important. You have us here as expert panelists and we all work together, so do feel to reach out to us if you've got any visas, healthcare, whatever questions you have, and we will help you in the best way we can.
Lovely, thanks Tracy. And Sharon?
Yes, thank you everybody for joining us this evening, and I think you've all understood that mortgages are complex. It's best to plan in advance. Things work very differently here in terms of finance affordability to other countries. It's a very different system. So feel free to get in touch. There's no silly questions. It's just better to plan, and that way there's no disappointment.
Absolutely. And Paulette?
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you found it useful and helpful. Just something I want to add is when I moved to France, quite often I was told, well, if you'd have asked, we'd have told you. But if you don't know, you don't know. You don't know to ask if you don't know. So that's, as I said before, most of my team have been through the relocation process, as I have. We know what you don't know, so we can answer that question before you know you even want to ask it. So don't hesitate to get in touch. We'd be very happy to help.
That's great. Thanks, Paulette. And Jake?
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I hope I wasn't too complex with the questions. It's very difficult to answer tax questions because it is so difficult sometimes to really get it together in a simple way. But if you do have any further questions, please go to our website, put your details in for someone to contact you, and we can go into more information with you. I would say the earlier the better. So if you haven't moved to France, definitely get in contact with us. Even if you're not moving for a year or two, it's best to get some advice from us. And we offer a no obligation review initially, so get the advice so that you're not doing the wrong thing before you move to France.
Thanks, Jake. And yes, a lot of the questions have covered complex subjects across the board today, but these webinars hopefully give you a taster of things to think about and answers to some of your questions. And as we said, you can get in touch with any of the panelists. So finally, over to Jonathan.
Yes, thank you, Karen, so much for your hosting. Thank you to the panelists and thank you to the audience for joining us. And I think I'd just add, you know, in the modern world, there's so much information, isn't there? You know, the internet and everything's going digital, and that's brilliant. It makes our lives easier. But actually, there's some things where the human input is still the best way of doing it. And certainly with, you know, your life savings move to another country, you know, you really do need to speak to specialists about this just to get our opinion. You can then go on the internet and do your own research, of course, but, you know, as we say, we're all specialists of this. We've done it for many, many years, and a conversation really will be beneficial.
Thanks, Jonathan. So once again, thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next time. Bye now.
Thanks very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.